Good morning. This is Verb Endings 1. This is matches up with Stage 4 in the Cambridge textbook, and this is what we went over around the week of September 6th through September 9th, right after Labor Day. If you're studying for the Stage 4 test, Stage 4, Stage 5 test, this is exactly where you want to be. So, we're going to look at the different endings of Latin verbs, and we're going to do that focusing on 3 questions. 1, when do Latin verbs change their endings? 2, what are the different endings that they change to? And number 3, there are some verbs that are irregular, in which there's only one that's super important for us right now. And what is that verb, and what does it look like? So the answer to the first question, verbs change their endings depending on the subject of the sentence. Specifically, they change their endings depending on whether the subject is first, second, or third person. We have first, second, and third person in English. And we say that a first person, in English, we say, if a verb is first person, then we are saying, I am doing it. This is the same in Latin. So if you, with the verb run, to say it in first person, you'd say, I run. If you were going to say the verb run in second person, you'd say, you run. And if you say the verb in third person, you're going to say, he, she, it runs. Or if there's a name like Johnny, Johnny runs. This could also count for, the name could also count for, titles or jobs or, just common nouns of things like the water runs or the merchant runs. And that would be, those would all fall under third person. You're going to see third person a lot more often than other ones. So that's when they change. They change based on what the subject of the sentence is. You don't always have to have a separate word in a Latin sentence to tell you who the subject is. You can always look at the ending of the verb. So in Latin, like in English, we have I, you, he, she, it, or name. And down here we have a new one that we're going to talk about shortly. So for in English, or in Latin, nouns or verbs are split up into first, second, and third person, singular, and plural. So if a Latin verb's ending changes to an O, then it is I am doing it. If it changes to an S, then you are doing it, because it's second person. Think S, second person. And lastly, third, T, it then changes to a T if he, she, or it is doing it. And lastly, there is the third, those were all singular. O, S, and T are singular. And you can kind of take that to the bank. O, S, T is the order that most verbs will follow, except for irregular ones in the present tense, which is what we're talking about right now. Then you have the third person plural, which is nt, or nt. And that is when the subject is they. So let's look at this actually being used. So, some examples. Ego venelicium saluto means we have the Latin word for I, which isn't totally necessary, but is used to give. The ego isn't always totally necessary, but we're going to include it. Ego means I. Venelicium means slave dealer, and you see the um, so it is accusative. It is receiving whatever the action is. And then we have saluto. So you probably remember this from the stage 1 vocab, salutat, which we have seen. But now the ending is O, and that's because the subject is I. Even if you could block out ego and see venelicium saluto, and it would mean the same thing. I greet the slave dealer. Down here we take that same sentence and change it to second person. So tu, Latin word for you, venelicium, the accusative case of venelicius, meaning slave dealer, and then salutas. So notice the difference in the verbs. Now that the subject is you, then you can look over here and you'll see that the ending has changed to an S. Now that A is there, and we'll talk more about how that's formed later. But you can often expect to see a letter or two cut off between one of the final consonants and the O in the first person as compared to the second, third, and all the rest. So When you have tu venelicium salutas, that means you greet the slave dealer. You have tu as the subject over here. The verb agrees with it with an as right here. And venelicium is just the noun that is in the accusative case, meaning the slave dealer is the direct object. Now we kind of change it up a little bit down here. We have mercator venelicium salutat. That M shouldn't be capitalized. It just auto did that. It's not a name, it's a job. Mercator venelicium salutat. Mercator, the merchant, venelicius, or venelicium, the slave dealer in the accusative case, and then salutat. Notice the T. It's because mercator is third person. This would go under the name category in the he, she, it name thing on the last page. So that would come out to mean the merchant greets the slave dealer. You have mercator right here. That gives you the name of who's doing it. If you just have, and then you have salutat, which is the verb greets, and that would be, and you can tell that it matches up with mercator because it ends in a T. If you just took away the mercator and you just had venelicium salutat, then that would come out to mean he, she, or it greets the slave dealer, just venelicium salutat. If there's no name given here, then you can just kind of fall back onto which one of those three options makes the most sense. Okay. So now we have irregular verbs. We only have one that is a big deal, and it is a very big deal because it's one of the most common nouns that we use all the time. It is, we started out knowing it as est, the word for is. What I was leaving out when I told you it just means is that it means specifically he, she, it, or name is. It is the third person singular form. This last chapter we also saw sum, which is the first person singular form, I am. We have est, the second person singular form, you are. And then we have est, he, she, it is. And then we have the third person plural over here, which is basically, just imagine if you had a bunch of he's or a bunch of she's or a bunch of it's, or you had a mix of all three and you wanted to talk about them all at the same time, you would say they. And that would be sunt. And actually this isn't all that irregular. If you look at the ending here, you have the S, you have the T, you have the nt. It's just that S-U-M just looks totally different at the front. And there's no way to prepare for this other than just to have it, in your brain, which honestly isn't that difficult considering how common this verb is. So, to recap, when do Latin verbs change their endings? They change their endings to fit the subject of the sentence, that is, to match the person doing the action, whether it is I, you, he, she, or it, or they, first, second, third person singular, third person plural. What are these different endings that they change to? Well, if it is first person singular, or the subject is I, then it'll change to an O. If it is second person singular, and the subject is you, then it'll be an S. If it is third person singular and the subject is he, she, it, or any given name or title, then the ending of the verb will be a T. And if it is they, if it's third person plural or they are doing something, then the ending will be nt. And the irregular verb is all the forms of to be: sum for I am, s for you are, est, he, she, it, or name is, and sunt for they are. I hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, shoot me a message. Let me know how I can do this video better. And best of luck.